400,000 women over the age of 45 currently face homelessness. Women who are in private rental market, who are not employed full-time and are sole parents have a 64% risk of losing the roof over their head. If they have been homeless before, the risk increases to a staggering 83%. Everyone needs a safe, secure home where we can live close to family and friends, especially as we grow older. It's a shameful fact that many older women are now facing an insecure future of homelessness and housing instability. Research shows that most of these women have never been homeless before. This person could be your sister, your aunt, your mother, or your grandmother. Hello and welcome to Ironing Out the Wrinkles. I'm your host, Ros McMaster.
And I'm your other host, Kate Shaw. Together, we're taking the age out of ageism, helping men and women embrace life after 50 with less fear. COVID-19 has both unveiled and accelerated the discrimination and systemic burdens that make women more vulnerable to poverty throughout their lives. A vulnerability that actually snowballs as we age. Prior to COVID, women over 55 were already the fastest growing group among the homeless. And without meaningful intervention, it is predicted that the number of older homeless women will more than double by 2031. These figures are grim, but has anyone noticed? Is there an outcry? Does anyone, apart from vulnerable women themselves, actually care?
Well, yes, thankfully, Maggie Shambrook, our guest today, cares, and she joins us to help make sense of this very upsetting issue. Maggie is a founding member of the Housing Older Women's Movement, also known as HOW. So Maggie, welcome and thank you for joining us to talk about this really important subject.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here. It's lovely to have an opportunity to speak to this issue because it is complex and confusing and confounding, really. How does this happen that this hundreds of thousands of women end up in this situation?
Yeah, and getting worse. And you know, the thing is, a lot of the times for the rest of us, out of sight, out of mind. And I was aware that the issue existed, and we all know someone in the periphery who is at risk of homelessness. But it wasn't until I met you at a community fundraiser recently, and one of the women associated with you got up and told her personal story of what would you say, moving from riches to rags, as it were. And that's when I first realized it could be any one of us there, but for the grace of God go I. So hearing a personal story really brings it home for us. And I know you've got a story of your own. So should we start there? What was your story?
Thanks very much. Yes. Well, my story, if I really want to go back to the very beginnings, was really when I was 6 months old and my mother, pregnant with my sister and me on her lap, went to the local state parliamentary member's office and sat there and said, I'm not moving till you give me a home. She'd been living on the banks of the creek in a caravan. My father, a really good man, but he was working many miles away out west, putting up poles and wires for the telecommunication system. So he was an essential worker, actually. And my mother was caring, for me, and there was a flood coming, and she thought, oh my God, I am not going to be here. So we ended up at the end of the day, she had keys to a house in Dalby, where I grew up in Drayton Street. And I grew up there and lived there till I was about 17, and then moved to Brisbane to a public service position, actually, at the time. And then over the years, I married, as you know, and life went on. And in the marriage, we didn't purchase a home, although we were hoping to. I went on to do some further studies. And anyway, our ambition was to buy a house. However, we didn't get that far. The marriage ended, and And I found myself in a situation of needing to rent, and I moved many times in a short period of time. And then eventually worked with other residents in, this was the Mackay area, and we formed a housing cooperative. So we were very fortunate. We had a state government at that stage, and actually Kevin Rudd was in the state government housing department as the DG or something, and rolled out this housing cooperative program. So I was involved in the design and development of housing that housed 4 families, and then eventually it grew to about 15 properties. Then I moved to Brisbane in search of sort of some further job opportunities. And I found a job, and I rented in a house for many, many years. And then about 6 years ago, I found myself, I'd lost my job. The organization had restructured. I'd lost my job, and the rental property was being sold. And I had applied for over 30 properties and could not find housing at all. And I was desperate, and I was feeling very anxious about what I was going to do, because it's the most scary proposition to be without shelter. And the prospect of having to put your stuff in storage and live in your car or something horrible like that was just terrifying to me, because I'd worked in the human services sector, and I'd worked with many people affected by a lack of affordable housing. I'd worked at a grassroots level and at neighbourhood centres and in other contexts. And I knew what was ahead of me if I couldn't find a home. So I was mentioning this to a colleague. Anyway, it turns out that his organisation owned several properties, but the underneath part of one of them was vacant. And here I am. This is where I've been for the last 6 years, living in this underneath a house. But it's very amenable, and I love my neighbours, and I'm okay now. But it was a terrifying experience, and that really brought me to, as a community worker, to focus on this issue. So I spent then some time working out this can't be just my problem, and it's certainly not just my problem. So
yes, that leads me to ask you, like, what is the definition of homelessness? For instance, many people don't realise that couch surfing is a form of homelessness.
Exactly. And particularly women of a certain age.
Yes.
And really women over 50, really we're talking here. We're not talking about frail aged, or we are talking about them actually, but the spectrum of women affected by this issue really is begins at around 50 for some of this, particularly if we've got unstable employment, or we're in feminized industries where actually our pay is low and all of those conditions are. But the homelessness experience of us, because we're often not, as you said earlier, not part of the service system, unless you worked in it like I did, but health system, teacher, a whole bunch of professions that are feminized areas of work. Often the work is casual and so on. And when we experience this time of not having a place that we feel safe, secure in, that's affordable to us, that protects us, that like any sort of home you hope is amenable to meet your needs, that it's part of a neighborhood or part of a community in some way, that you feel protected and safe in that area, you feel like you belong in some way, or that it's a good place to live. Once you don't have that, you get this feeling that you could be attacked, that
very vulnerable,
your personal protection is not secure, that you have to hide. And really, many women do hide, and they don't even tell their families, because they think that it's a really shameful thing that they've found themselves in this situation. How could it have happened? It's bewildering, really. How could this have happened? Because often they're not aware of the broader systems that are impacting on their lives. And when that all impacts at a certain point, and you are without a safe, secure place to live, you do anything at all to hide. You will not tell anyone. You will keep moving your car or your house, or pretend that but whether you're living in a garage or a shed, or you just feel so ashamed and so vulnerable. It's just the most awful experience.
Yes, you remind me of a friend of mine. She's since passed away, but she was thought she was in a happy enough marriage of many years, and quite well off, and went home one day after a day out and found that she couldn't get into her house, and found that her husband had frozen all their accounts. He had a new partner, unbeknownst to her. And she felt the same way. She couldn't go to any of her friends. She was mortified. She was so ashamed. I didn't know her then. And she didn't know what to do, where to go. Like, I wouldn't know what to do or where to go. And she went to the convent and knocked on their door and asked them to take her in return for doing, scrubbing floors and things like that. And they did. And she got on her feet eventually and ended up opening up her own little business down the track. But I just thought to myself, I wouldn't know where to go myself. I just wouldn't know what to do. What do you do if you haven't got any...
If you found yourself suddenly locked out of your home in such a way, what do you do? Where do you go immediately for help?
The Housing Older Women's movement for the last 3 years have really lobbied, or 2 years, has lobbied really hard to get a service that supports women in these circumstances. Can I just say, reflecting quickly back on that story, a colleague recently who's working in this space said, yes, I suffered STDs from my marriage. I said, STD from your marriage? She said, yes, it was sexually transmitted debt.
That's a good one.
I've heard that before, actually. That's really good.
And I thought there's truth in that, because if you come out of your marriage, and actually many women who've divorced didn't do well in property settlements, or didn't do well enough to reinvest into a home. Like some of the women in our experience, some of them have been part of owning up to 5 homes and still don't own a home. So each of the situations that occurred never gave them enough, and the housing market grew faster than the tiny, than the relatively small amount of money. Plus, as a woman in insecure employment, and often low-paid employment in the feminized industries, like I said, childcare, health, all those industries, just never was eligible for a bank loan. So just couldn't get anywhere, leverage enough to get into a safe, secure place of their own. But anyway, back to the story about where do you go, what do you do? And I think it's interesting that your friend went to a convent, because actually that's a pretty good strategy, really. Although I just heard that the Mercy Order in particular have just sold off a lot of their property.
Oh no, this was 10 years ago.
There's an opportunity there, like there might have been many years ago. But the thing is, we have lobbied for a new service, and this service is called Housing Older Women's Support Service. Now, it eventually will be a statewide service, and it provides the opportunity for women to contact them. They take their details. They make provision for people to come and sit with you. So if you're not in a position to get to them, and they're based in West End in Brisbane, but if you're not in a position to get there, then they will either do some, work with you over the phone, or come to a coffee house somewhere, meet you halfway, or even drive up to the Sunshine Coast or down to the Gold Coast.
Wow.
So they're very amenable to meeting your needs, and and sitting down with you and saying, this is the story, this is the picture of why you're in this situation, and these are the options. Now, the options aren't great, and we have been working with the Minister for Housing, Leanne Enoch. She's been amazing. She's very, very tuned to this issue, both in terms of her own life experiences, but also the fact that she's got friends in this situation. So she's well aware of the seriousness of this problem, and she's been very supportive of looking at ways that we can address the problem. And we're still in a process of doing that. And Queensland Shelter has been incredible too. It's a peak body for housing and homelessness in Queensland, and they've been great. They actually helped us hold the first forums back in one in December 2019 and the second one in February of 2023, where we contacted organizations and individuals to say, who else is interested in this story, in this problem, and in addressing this issue? And we had 40 or so people at both of those. And in the second one, we formed the Housing Older Women's Movement, and we called it a movement in a purposeful way because it's a movement of women affected by this issue and their supporters seeking to find solutions and negotiating with the systems that are holding the opportunities and resources necessary to create new responses to this particular situation. And there are really great responses that we can make. And I can talk.
What are some of those? Yeah, what are some of those responses?
Some of the responses we believe are that we need, if we think about the housing system as a system that 66% of people in Australia are comfortably housed and have investment properties and so on. So there's a market system for housing, right? Now, those of us that can't afford to participate in that system, and as you know, and many people now know, their sons and daughters are having a very hard time often getting into that system. But that system is making the people who can participate in it a lot of money. It's one of the most likely wealth generation activities you can be in is property, both your own personal property, but also investment properties. And actually the Howard government in the Howard years, he said he didn't even actually have a housing minister. He just said, what we're going to do is we're going to incentivize the private market, that is the mums and dads and others in Australia, to invest in private and the provision of private rental. Excuse me, I'll just have a sip of water. And then the incentivizing really is in the form of negative gearing, tax concessions. And let me tell you, and it was affirmed by two economists recently, that the people of Australia subsidise that 66% of homeowners and investors, 79 billion, B-I-L-L-I-O-N dollars per annum in tax breaks and a whole range of other breaks.
It's outrageous.
Wow.
Gosh.
That is incredible. And that's for 66% of the population. And it's everyone who owns a home and who owns investment properties. In terms of those of us who are locked out of that, the other end of the spectrum is social housing. Now, we stopped building social housing in the 50s when my mother sat in the local member's office. The Housing Commission of Australia had just been set up, and public housing was actually set up for the workers and for really anyone who needed housing actually in those days. And then over the years, and particularly when we kind of monetized or commercialized the housing sector, so people made money out of it, it was no longer a right. It was only accessible to people who could afford to get into it. And that was pretty reasonable for a long, long time. People could afford to get into it. But then it changed and it became monetized, and the social housing sector shrunk because the public sector didn't build much. It built very specialized accommodation for people with special needs, but very little else. Some little bit of seniors housing. So in Queensland, we had 3% of all housing was public housing. In other states, it was about 5 or 6%. So we always had less in Queensland anyway. And then when it stopped building it, then that option began to get narrower and narrower, and to a point now where to get on the register for that housing, you have to be really, really in deep. You have to have a range of very complex needs. You have to, it's not just a right of access to people because they've got no other choice. That is not the case anymore. It's really high priority is given to people with complex needs. And I agree that that's really important. The How movement agrees that we need to see those people housed. But where does that leave us as a group of people then, in terms of not being able to get into the social housing sector, not being able to get into the private rental market or the house ownership market? Well, what are our choices?
One thing I found that was, well, in Europe, don't they have, I remember when I was in the 70s and we all did our traveling when we were young, because I'm 70 this year, and we all did that. And I remember hearing for the first time that they have 99-year leases on their places. Why don't we do that here?
Exactly. And there are many options exactly like that. Community land trusts, which is land held in perpetuity for housing for 99 years or for whatever term. There are many of those in Europe. And can I say that this problem, while it's fairly serious in Australia, excuse me, it's also serious in other countries in the world. So women in our position, this is a legacy of gender inequity, pay inequity, systems that have failed us. We didn't have child support systems until mandatory ones till 1988. We didn't have superannuation until 1992. And many women who were working in casualised or part-time areas, I'm really sorry, but my throat's gone crazy. Just one moment. Great. So in many parts of the world where neoliberalist kind of policies impacted in the same way as they did here, where public entities withdrew from the provision of public housing, and the housing market itself was the market, so it acts like a market, it incentivizes wealth generation. It is incentivized through tax reductions and so on. So those opportunities for housing of people, women like us, just reduced down to we really didn't have any options left but our cars or someone's garage or someone's couch or whatever, And that's in countries like Greece, Ireland, Canada, other parts of Europe. Many of us too grew up in nuclear families, so we don't have extended family systems either, In many places you might be able to go and stay with cousins, aunts, uncles, whatever, but we don't have that, often don't have that extended family system to support us, so we're on our own,
Yes, we tend to feel like we're going to be a burden to people, don't we? So
exactly, and we don't fit the stereotype of the wonderfully coiffured woman running down the beach with a silver fox with her new Nikes and her beautiful, activewear, planning the next holiday. That is not the story.
That's so true, Maggie. I remember I had the great honour of a few years ago working for a club called the 139 Club. It was based in Fortitude Valley, and
yes, I'm familiar with it.
The only thing, I'm a singer, so we provided the entertainment, and they had these art classes that the homeless were invited to belong to, and a lot of them were absolutely amazing. As you know, Ross came to some of them, and a big law firm in Minter and Ellison used to open up their rooms and have these shows, and we do the music with my musicians, and I get a sponsor to pay them. Arup did that. And I was so impressive, all that kind of work. And I got to know the management, who were wonderful. They bring in dentists and they bring in hairdressers and stuff. I think it's all changed now, but this is a few years back. But I remember they put out a photographic book and had a big exhibition, and it just really, I'll take it to the grave, seeing all these people who'd been lawyers or doctors or teachers, professional people who'd found themselves homeless, often through no fault of their own, through mental illness or physical illness or marriage breakdown or just pure bad luck. And heartbreaking. I just wish I had a magic wand. And seeing women today on the street my age, asleep on a park bench, it's just all, and any age, anyone that's homeless, they're everywhere. There seems to be more and more.
It is. And really it's only, the visible ones are only about 3, they estimate about 3 to sometimes more, but in the cities, but really only under 10% visible. The rest of us are invisible. You could walk by me in the street, you would know that I was on the verge of homelessness. You know, you could walk past any person and they present really well. Many of the women in our cohort have PhDs, have master's degrees or undergrad degrees. They've lived full lives of raising families, caring for elderly members or unwell members of their families, caring for children with special needs, you know, on their own often, because the partner disappears under those circumstances quite often. So we've contributed to our civil society organizations, whether they've been the local netball club or the local, you know, footy club or whatever it's been, you know, supporting our kids to participate. Doing all of this, in addition to often studying, getting, you know, and keeping on working during it often. And we end up in a situation like this. You know, that doesn't seem right. It's just not right.
Yeah.
And it's not because we've made poor decisions in our lives. You know, you should be able to get divorced if you're in a terrible marriage and not end up homeless. You know, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
We've got thousands and thousands of children who aren't in decent accommodation. Well, that's ridiculous in a country this wealthy. There's only 25 million of us. God, there's more people living in New York than here, you know?
Yeah, that's crazy. But just, you know, when you were saying you wouldn't know that you were passing someone in the street who was homeless, and very often they don't tell anyone because of the shame. Is there some way, you know, is there a particular behavior they exhibit or language they use that would tell us that someone we knew was in trouble and not saying? Are there signs?
How close you might be to them, but certainly, I mean, you know, certainly it's very hard to tell. We're very good at pretending that everything's okay and protecting our dignity and our fragments of
course, I can appreciate that.
To sort of present as being okay and normal and not allowing the shame or embarrassment to manifest itself. You know, we're pretty good at hiding all of that. And many of us don't turn to drink and don't end up in the chronic, terrible situations that many women find themselves in, you know, who've got intergenerational trauma, who've got terrible, terrible distress. So if they're visibly showing themselves in public places, they're often the very, very hardcore end of a very distressed life. You know what I mean? And
yes,
that isn't our story, everyone's story. Those women too were affected by the same forces that are affecting us, but we often are, and I'm not trying to compare the two at all. What I'm trying to say is that all women need housing, actually. You know, it doesn't matter what age you are, it doesn't matter what your story is, we all need to have a safe, secure, affordable place in which we can live out our best lives, you know?
Yes.
And many of us have got so much to contribute. We've been contributing all our lives, but when you get into a situation of housing precarity where you're just terrified of your situation, all of your ability to be active in the community, to contribute your best self goes out the window, because all you can think about is survival each day, you know? So it's a terrible loss of potential that we are experiencing here, not creating solutions. But the other sort of solutions that we've been looking at in the How movement are things like linking housing to community by creating models like co-living or co-housing. They're two separate models. One is that you have people sharing one property, in various ways, and there's many configurations that you can create around that, or co-housing models, which are in the United States, they're in Europe, they're in, you know, and there's several in Australia as well now starting to develop, but we need many, many, many more of them. They're lower density, they're not units of 60 and 70, they're really often under 20, sometimes under 10, so they're built low density, you have your own separate unit, and then you have share accommodation, a shared amenity rather. And the shared amenity space, it's a building which might have a fully functioning kitchen, which might have a guest space, which might have a library, a lounge area, an eating area, a laundry or whatever. And then your own independent living spaces are separate. So they're like pavilions around a shared amenity space. Because quite frankly, as we get older, we need less and less and less. We need good quality of some things, but less.
We don't need the stuff.
You know,
no,
we don't need
lots of stuff. I agree.
Yes. Well,
we
in
need
community. Community is very important.
Yes, we were listening to something yesterday and they were saying that social isolation is a major issue. You know, they have in the UK a minister for, what is it? A minister for loneliness.
They have one in Dubai too. Dubai, my daughter lives in Dubai, Maggie. And my daughter lives in Dubai and they have a minister for happiness. Yeah, they do.
That seems like a better model to me, because our current social system operates on a deficit model. So the more complex the needs, the more, you know, disenfranchised you are, the more likely you are to get some support. And so the women, this cohort of women who are affected by this don't identify with that level of complexity. You know, they just, their only complex and stressful thing is that they don't have a home.
So
there's plenty of models that we can create, but we need the support of that 66% of the population to speak to their local politicians, to speak to others and say, we cannot have a situation where the grandmothers, mothers, sisters, aunts of our nation who've contributed to the well-being of this nation over their lifetime, living out a legacy now of inequity. We cannot tolerate that situation. It is time we changed it, and we must see all women in safe, secure housing, you know, and using different models. And yes, I was going to say the idea of linking community with housing. They say that if you live on your, and my mother owned her own home eventually, my mum and dad bought their own home. They lived on the Gold Coast, but mum was so unhappy. All her family members had died. She was in her 80s. She didn't have any siblings left, no partners left. All her friends had died. Everyone she loved in her life, except us children, had died. She had no friendly neighbors, and she just had the most terrible time in her own house because she couldn't get out because of mobility issues, you know, and she just wanted to die. And I thought, wow, you know, that's amazing that you can live such a full life and then be so isolated and alone. And they say it's the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, the impact on your health of loneliness every day.
We're such social animals. Well, COVID did that, didn't it?
I mean, that's one of the UN's even involved in the ageism fight now, because they're trying to prevent the loneliness and the impact on the health system, you know, just from people not working, not having homes.
And not having different models of homes, Roz, where we actually can, you know, if you lived in those sort of settings where you had 5 or 6 or maybe up to 10 people around you, that you all know each other, you all keep an eye out for each other. You've got built-in security because everyone's keeping an eye out on what's going on, and you feel secure in that sense. And even if you have mixed tenures, so you have some people own their place, some people rent their place, some people have a shared equity in that place, you know, they own a portion of it. If you all live together and you're intergenerational, you've always got someone to fix your light bulb, you know.
I like that. Like in Stockholm, they do that, don't they?
Yes.
They have a mixture of ages and it works very well.
Yes,
exactly.
And even in town planning now, there's a lot of talk about creating communities that promote intergenerational living, because it's so important. What the young can learn from the older wisdom and the older people who certainly
Yes,
benefit from
yeah.
the new knowledge of the young people.
Yes.
That's right, exactly. It's a wonderful exchange and a lot of reciprocity, or that principle of reciprocity we've lost, you know. It's everyone just trying to manage themselves and not, but we do see it in times of crisis where people do rally. We are humans. We like to support each other. We like to reciprocate. We like to receive and give, don't we? It's just part of
Yes,
who we are as beings. So,
I hope so.
Yes.
I hope so.
I mean, not everyone is, but enough of us are, you know. I think enough of us
Yes.
can do that. And what we were saying was that in local communities, if people could get together in these community-led initiatives and look at the housing in their community, how much empty properties there are, who owns those properties? Could we rent out, you know, our granny flat? Can we make that available at an affordable rate under good conditions? And, you know, can we, if there's been empty houses in your street, who owns those houses? Would they be prepared to rent them at a reasonable rate? You know, could a community housing provider take over the management of them, and or a head lease arrangement so that they can be homes for women? And actually older women are premium tenants, let me tell you, where
Yes.
most of us pay our rent, live well. You know, someone was saying the other day, oh, I don't mind a good party, and I said,
Oh,
I said, well, I'm sure if we could invite the neighbours, that would be a very good idea, you know.
Yes.
Have the odd neighbourhood party or something. But you know, we're not just sitting there knitting and crocheting, you know. We are humans that want to do fun things and be part of our neighbourhood and a high functioning neighbourhood.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
yes. As someone else said, one of our other guests said, you know, be older, but don't be old.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Exactly. That's right. Exactly. So,
Yeah.
you know, we have much to many different models to create and more options, because really what we're talking about here is having choice and not being stuck in this situation, which is a legacy of many years of inattention to this whole issue. And now we're stuck with many hundreds of thousands of women in this terrible situation.
Yes, choice. Absolutely,
It's
choice.
It's heartbreaking.
Yes.
Yes. And reasonable choice and you know, kind of accessible choices, not just of kind of
They deserve dignity.
aspiration.
Dignity,
Yeah,
exactly.
yes.
Yeah.
Dignity.
Yeah.
Give it back to them. Yes.
Yes, and we need the women affected to be part of the creating the solutions. That's what I love about our work in the How movement. We're people who are affected by this issue. We're very we have a lot of agency in our lives. We don't need people to fix us or fix our problems. We're quite able to fix ourselves if we get the right supports. And we've spent 3 years now researching this issue, looking at all possible options and ways forward. We're pretty clear on what works and what won't work. And we want to be part of creating the solutions.
Is that the same in all the states the same? Is it the same is that everywhere in Australia?
There is movements like ours beginning all over the place, yes.
Oh,
it's
good.
starting to bubble, but it hasn't kind of reached a crescendo. We're a long way from it. And the other thing is that, quite honestly, we've got generations coming up behind us. So there's a lot of younger women in their 30s and 40s that are going to be treading the same path if we don't find some solutions. Actually, most of us will only have a 10 or 20-year time frame to do any kind of change in this space. And if we don't do it, then the next generation is going to have to do it, because, you know, the situation will continue.
Absolutely.
The market will not change. What it's doing is what markets do, you know. And if you can't participate in it, then there has to be other options.
I love your people power suggestion of us looking in our local areas to see if there's anywhere that people can be housed. I think that's people power is very immense if we get together.
It is. And even if you bring your local member and say, look, I've been hearing about this issue. We've been talking to people. We absolutely, as a nation, have to do something to fix this. This is not okay. We have to have the women of our nation housed securely and safely and able to contribute to the, you know, for the rest of their lives in the way that they can.
Yes.
You know, and whatever that is.
Could be helping the next female Prime Minister.
Yes.
It could be raising our granddaughters and great-granddaughters could be the next one, or our neighbour's daughter or our friend's daughter or something, exactly. That's right.
Wonderful. Well, Maggie, if there's no other vital points that you want to put across, we might round that off now. So just in finishing, is there one bit of advice that you would, words of encouragement that you would want to give any woman over the age of 50 who is finding herself becoming homeless now?
Yes, reach out. Don't stay hidden. Become visible. Be brave and courageous about that. Talk to your local member. Do what my mother did if you have to. Go and sit in their office and say, I need a solution here. Put me in touch with the people who can help me, because I cannot live this kind of life and be able to, exist well and contribute to society. I can't do it. It's terrifying and I need a home. So whether it's local services, whether it's the local community centre, whether it's the local church, whether it's the, your local parliamentary member, and the rest of us who are reasonably secure at the moment at least, should be talking to our local politicians, both local government, state government and federal government, because all levels of government participate in some form with housing, whether it's zoning issues at a local level, mandatory inclusionary zoning and made that mandatory. Many different ways in which local government can help, state government can help with the provision of social housing, and federal government can help with new initiatives, shared equity schemes, a whole range of schemes. And we can, and as well as create more community land trusts. There are many solutions. Put them in touch with us at the How Movement. Come and talk to us, and we'll put you in touch with services or whoever. So,
bless you. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great, Maggie.
We just figure we've got this last bit of legacy work that we need to get done before we leave this mortal coil, and we must give it our best shot.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Maggie. We'll definitely put all the links there for everybody to get in touch with How if they're in a stressful situation and needing to reach out for support. And if anyone's got a story to tell about today's topic, then please leave a comment for us. Get in touch and we'll help you reach out to the right people as well.
Fantastic.
So thank you again, Maggie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go well. Thank you.